Forever hold your peace. Would any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to provide a contribution to this budget debate. I am under a stern instruction from the Honorable Premier to keep this to no more than an hour. I said no more than an hour. Madam Premier wants the second reading wrapped up as quickly as possible, Mr. Speaker. To keep myself on track, Mr. Speaker, I want to just cover three main areas in this contribution. From my perspective, what our country's overarching challenge is at present. 1. 2, what's on the horizon from the Ministry of Financial Services and Commerce perspective that can help? 2. And 3, Mr. Speaker, what's on the horizon from the Ministry of Investment, Innovation, and Social Development's perspective that can help? To illustrate, Mr. Speaker, I'll use two recent experiences that will lead into what I believe is our overarching challenge. Last month, I spoke at an event of an asset management service provider that was celebrating a rebranding and expansion of services in Cayman. And this particular service provider, Mr. Speaker, is largely Caymanian owned, managed, and operated, with projections to expand its presence in Cayman over the next 12 months. So this service provider also has branches elsewhere in the world. And some of the attendees that night had never been to Cayman ever until then. And they spoke as they sort of mingled and socialized before my keynote. Those visitors spoke of Cayman in such glowing terms. The business opportunities that they see, the prospects, the infrastructure, the regulatory framework. But, Mr. Speaker, as you know, because I wear two hats, I have a unique perspective in that I hear and see all of those potential economic opportunities, on one hand, from the perspective of financial services and commerce. But on the other hand, I also see deep-rooted challenges, particularly in the area of social development. So I always view those conversations with sort of mixed feelings, Mr. Speaker. And as I engaged in the keynote, I told the attendees that I agreed with their excitement about Cayman's prospects. But on the other hand, I wanted them to keep in mind the social economic struggles of our people on the other end, and to do what they can in their roles to uplift our people. So that it's not totally a matter just for the government, but little things that they can also do in the community to help us prosper. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that after I made those remarks and talked to people afterwards, I could see that those concerns are not specific to these islands, Mr. Speaker. Because in the second recent experience I had, I spoke at the Cayman Captive Forum last month, which is one of the largest captive insurance conferences in the world that's held right here in Cayman. Approximately 1,500 attendees, most from overseas, going out to the member for Cayman Brac West and Little Cayman's Point, spending money in the real local economy. They don't just sit at the Ritz. They go out for dinner. They go out on tours. They go to the Stingray City, spending money in the real economy. And I said to them in that keynote address for the Cayman Captive Forum that one of the interesting aspects of my role, Mr. Speaker, is when you travel, you get to meet leaders in the region and also elsewhere around the world. And why that is beneficial isn't just because in certain cases there's certain celebrity star power that you get from being around other people, is to listen to the challenges that those leaders are talking about that they face in their countries. And broadly speaking, it's roughly the same. Income inequality, cost of living, environmental concerns, spikes in crime, access to housing. So Cayman is not alone in wrestling with these issues. It's a global challenge. Former US President Obama probably captured it best when he said, quote, "The basic bargain at the heart of our economy has frayed." The former president noted that a combination of growing income inequality and a lack of upward mobility, quote, "is a defining challenge of our time." The former president asserted, Mr. Speaker, that in his case, the US government should take steps to reverse decades-long trends that have widened the gap between the wealthy and everybody else. In other words, Mr. Speaker, I told the Cayman Captive Forum that the grassroots in our respective communities don't feel part of the success. And similar to Mr. Obama's analysis about the US, this didn't just come about in Cayman in the last couple of years. One might think from listening to the leader of the opposition's contribution and his deputy that some of these problems aren't long-standing issues that require reform that haven't really had serious attention. Someone could look at the deputy opposition leader and say the list of litany of things that he read out earlier, someone could look at him and say, well, majority of that was on your team's watch too. But perhaps, as the opposition has indicated on several occasions, that everything was going to be covered, but for COVID, they had it all under control, and it would all have been solved. Maybe. Maybe not. Lord only knows. But I think our people are done with the blame game. I think our people are done. I think they're unmoved by the back and forth. Mr. Speaker, since you are now in that role and you are limited, hasn't been eliminated, but limited to when you'll invoke Shakespeare, one of us should help take up the mantle. I will try tonight. To quote Shakespeare, there is nothing so confining as the prisons of our own perceptions. Say it again. There is nothing so confining as the prisons of our own perceptions. And what I mean by that is stop dwelling on the past. Stop blame game. And as the deputy governor said earlier, start a spirit of collaboration, because that's what our people, I think, want to see and hear. What's concerning them is they see the private jets flying in. They know people are going on expensive vacations. They see large homes in gated communities. They see high salaries and feel, real or perceived, left out. So I told the Cayman Captive Forum, Mr. Speaker, that all of us globally need to try to tackle this, one, because it's the right thing to do, and two, more pragmatically, for those of a business mind, is because the more frustrated people get, the more they'll begin to advocate for policies that may ultimately derail the economic opportunities that could assist with improving their lives in the long run. What one of my sociology professors used to say 20-some years ago, when he was thinking of the US economy in the 70s going into the 80s, that's how some folks inadvertently end up voting against their longer-term interest. So the central challenge is a more inclusive economy. Because even if we achieve sustainable growth, as the leader of the opposition put it, if our people aren't participating in that sustainable growth, it may be sustainable, but it may not advance our people. So we need to look to include our people at every step of the way. What's on the horizon, Mr. Speaker, from financial services and commerce perspective that can help? First of all, thanks to my partner in crime fighting, the Honorable Attorney General, and all relevant public and private sector entities for Cayman being removed from the gray list. Everywhere I go, Mr. Speaker, in recent weeks, whether it's formal conferences, gala dinners, Christmas functions of financial services firms, social gatherings with constituents, the positive effect of the delisting is tremendous. There are new transactions coming in from long-standing existing clients that were waiting for this moment. There are new instructions coming in from brand new clients who are now turning to Cayman as their financial services center of choice. There are growing areas of business that at one time or another had eluded us that are now really taking shape. Insurance and reinsurance, family office arrangements, tech-related business, intellectual property. And that's on top of all of our strong traditional services, such as investment funds, fiduciary services, structured finance, aviation, and shipping registration. That's why I'm excited to outline some of our plans, flavor of what we plan to do in 24 and 25. In financial services, we will continue to sharpen existing products and introduce new products, enhancements to the Companies Act, to have clarifying provisions to the statutory scheme to wind up companies, enhance the provisions to have efficient mergers, consolidations, and conversions, a revamped Merchant Shipping Act to modernize our ship registration and ship international obligations framework. Madam Clerk, I think that bill is already down here, so this isn't pie in the sky. It's already been gazetted. It's here. Virtual assets, service providers amendments. We're going to also disapply the rule on perpetuities for future existing and future Cayman trusts, which the STEP practitioners are excited about. We'll have more legislation to enhance what we can do and even modern treaties to really get reinsurance business going in the Cayman Islands. Enhancements to our exempted limited partnership bill to make it even more competitive than it is now. This is the main tool that's used for private equity funds. We owe it to them after the registration of private funds to enhance that tool and make it even more attractive. And develop a sustainable finance ESG framework to enhance this sector for private funds and investment funds. In addition to all of that, there'll be legislative amendments to regulatory laws to enhance revenue of all of the regulatory laws, and this will include the banks. Mr. Speaker, in recent weeks, many of our people have been agitated by the transactional fees that have been popping up from the retail banks. And some of them have done so and have advanced when asked that, wait a minute, this is really now just being broken out when it all used to be a lump sum, so you're not really paying any more, it's just that you didn't see it all. But I think in this climate of high interest rates, it's not going down so well. But either way, even if they're right and there's no effect, when I asked the Monetary Authority about this and I asked the Ministry about this, They say, well, the monetary authority wasn't set up to regulate for this purpose. They're set up to regulate for international standards and prudential regulations, but not this sort of consumer protection. But we can't just not acknowledge that there is a gap. And we have to get to grips with it. Because even if it's proven that the banks are right this time, what if they're not right next time and the gap is there again? So I've asked the Monetary Authority and the ministry to get on top of this with a working group, come back with some proposals of how we're going to regulate and fix this gap for the consumer. And even if that's not enough, Mr. Speaker, we'll also be moving legislation and updates to regulations to enhance our regulatory compliance and tax information frameworks to be proactive for the FATF fifth round, upcoming OECD assessments, and the EU Code of Conduct evaluations. Now, speaking of the EU, Mr. Speaker, a good friend of mine who represents a key stakeholder in financial services laughed out loud when we were on the phone this morning at the suggestion of the leader of the opposition that our efforts in Europe were insufficient. Now, there's a couple of ways I could handle this, Mr. Speaker. I could invoke Shakespeare again and say, quote, I'm disgraced, impeached, and baffled here, pierced to the soul with the slanderer's venom spear. Nah, I won't go down that road. It could lead me down the road that my friend from Georgetown West, the member for Georgetown West, was headed, and you helped stop them. I could pounce and go to town on the gratuitous remark about stopping the overseas office's plan to tie them up with audits and inquiries. Suffice it to say, all that did with the ultimate and true aim was end up with new rules to bolster the civil service in an area that was gray, where there was an unwritten practice, and now there's a solid policy. Thank you, Deputy Governor. Because all of that is in the past, Mr. Speaker. And just re-raising it and hashing it and throwing out cheap shots just creates division and tension over collaboration. So, Mr. Speaker, I will, instead of Shakespeare, invoke a more modern approach and invoke hip-hop artist Jay-Z and just brush my shoulders off, as the record speaks for itself. Mr. Speaker, while we're on overseas offices, Cabinet recently signed off on the launch of the Cayman Islands Government Asia office in Singapore. And also, we'll be planting a financial services officer in the Cayman Islands London office to engage both London and Brussels, which is just a 2-hour train ride away from London. We also have to and must enhance an exciting area of our local intellectual property registration. It came as a bit of a surprise to me, Mr. Speaker, until as part of an exploratory trip to Singapore that I attended the INTA conference, which is the world's largest conference on intellectual property, and to see with my own eyes what Cayman practitioners have been saying. This is a huge growth area where Cayman is already leading. And still, on top of that lead that we still have some exciting developments to modernize the IP regime. This will include amendments to the design rights registration legislation, the copyright order, and the trademarks legislation. This will strengthen IP protections for both local and international business. We also, turning to commerce, that covers a lot of financial services, I want to specifically pause here, Mr. Speaker, and acknowledge the new parliamentary secretary that I have for commerce, the member for West Bay North, Mr. Bernie Bush. I commend the member, because it cannot be easy in the middle of a cycle to relinquish and sacrifice a ministerial post. And I think we should all applaud that effort, because not many people would have done it. in this area to let him know, he's not here, but you tell him, we're going to keep him busy because I'll need assistance in terms of streamlining the licensing framework for local businesses. The commerce framework will involve synchronizing the legislative and policy framework, organizational restructuring to cultivate business enabling environment at the grassroots level, facilitate sustainable commerce, and enhance DCI's efficiency and effectiveness. This will include amendments to the trade and business license legislation, the local companies control law legislation, the liquor licensing and music and dancing legislation. Collectively, this will boost and, more importantly, make local commerce much more efficient. And our small business incentive program will continue. As noted earlier by the member for Cayman Brac West and Little Cayman, I can confirm the Cabinet has extended the small business incentive program, and that should be published shortly. But I'm happy to work with the member. If you, having seen that, you know the program because it's been around since 2017, haven't seen that, if there's more work you think needs to be done with the sister islands, happy to take your call, sir, and meet with you to see how else it could be enhanced. And the honorable premiers, but you always have my ear. So as part of, if even substantially, most of that is in train, comes to fruition, it'll still have to be balanced with strategies to ensure that Caymanians are feeling that, either in conducting their affairs or getting jobs, which is why, as part of the Minister for Border Control and Labor, part of his revenue package includes balancing new work permit regimes to help get in appropriate foreign talent that we need while ensuring that the balance is struck that Caymanians are uplifted. And I look forward to working with the minister in that regard. What's on the horizon for the Ministry of Investment, Innovation, Social Development that can help, Mr. Speaker? It's been a comprehensive approach so far to reimagine the space, to develop and support and uplift the most vulnerable with new and revamped services, advancing digital innovation capacities in the country, and facilitating investment opportunities to support social development and facilities in the community. We'll plan to commence our Financial Assistance Act 2022. We completed in October and part of November a series of town halls to explain the new system. We gathered feedback that we're going to incorporate and begin to roll out the reforms. The deputy leader of the opposition mentioned apprenticeship. He mentioned internships, but I also wanted to mention the slight difference with apprenticeships because that has the additional training aspect that he was talking about. We've got a bank of partners in the private sector, NGOs, and public service that are willing to help so that those who are able have a chance to get a job, not in the traditional sense because the salary that they're getting is already the benefit that they get from as financial assistance, but in exchange to be able to participate in those businesses with the sincere hope that those businesses will take the person on to full-time employment, thereby reducing the amount that's going to those who are able, so we can increase the amount over time that's going to those who are on long-term financial assistance and unable to earn anymore. There'll be amendments to the Children's Act. This is long overdue. It's a massive piece of legislation, originally enacted in 1995, and has had minimal revisions since about 2012. We'll have to emphasize the involvement of the child and enhancing the voice of the child as aligned under the UN Convention of the Rights of a Child, which the Cayman Islands is a signatory. We will be increasing the advocacy of children through the involvement and hopefully set out the framework for the establishment of a children's commissioner, which the Deputy Governor alluded to, which is coming out of your work of the Safeguarding Board. We also are going to repeal and replace the Adoption of Children's Act. It is out of date. It takes too long. Anybody who has been involved with an adoption knows that the process is just too arduous, too tedious, and needs to be streamlined. The legislation was initially enacted in 1967 and has never really been a serious overhaul since. Our intention is to also become a signatory of the 1993 Hague Convention on the Protection of Children and Cooperation in respect of inter-country adoptions through this legislative reform. The best interests of the child is at the forefront and should be at the forefront of this process, and we need to make that felt by those trying to perform adoption. The leader of the opposition referred to the Older Persons Act, 2017, a fantastic achievement, very good step. But as he alluded to, it's an unfinished project. It needs to be strengthened. It needs to have teeth in terms of identifying safeguarding issues with some enforcement to do something about it with secondary regulatory legislation. While that is happening, we will also reevaluate the programs and the services delivered by the Department of Children and Family Services. We plan to do a scoping exercise to see what's working, what's not, what can be innovated. Same goes for the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, MASH. Great idea. 1.0, good step. But I think it's about time for 2.0. Look at what is not working, strengthen it. Good idea in principle, breaks down the silos, but it does have deficiencies. And where those deficiencies manifest themselves are in the stats that show the abuse, domestic abuse, that is rising in this country that we have to curb. We'll be undergoing design and build plan of a new Sunrise Adult Training Center. I think the Minister for Planning has a swap of land in mind that will keep it in town. That's correct? Yes. And hopefully be able to get that at least in the design and build phase in the next budget cycle. Because it's been talked about for too long, and we need to be able to show that segment of the population that we're serious in this area. Speaking of facilities, Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Sports and member for East End will chase me down after the speech if I don't mention something, and he won't give me the plate of turtle he promised me for Christmas if I don't mention this. But we will also be planning the design of a new older persons care home in East End. Now, opposition, you won't have to guess which capital budget line item it is, because if you have any questions before I get to answer them, the member for East End will be answering before me. He knows exactly which line it is, and he's got his lines up to protect it. Thank you. Thank you, member. We'll also have, as I think was a central theme in most of the contributions I heard, have to ensure that eGov and CSD have increased staff for all of the digital projects that you've heard everybody wants around the chamber. It sounds easy. It sounds good tagline. We'll digitize this. We'll innovate that. That doesn't happen without the resources in CSD and eGov. They have not had, and may still not have after the cycle, but we hope to add more resources to get this done. So this isn't just about the budget for the Deputy Premier. This is to help all the other ministries with all the projects that they wish to innovate. We also will be launching our pilot program to roll out the national EID, particularly as a priority, those who were our strongest advocates for it when the bill was published and then successfully passed, the bills were successfully published and then passed, for young persons and particularly older persons, some of which who've never had an ID and struggle through the banking system, struggle through government services. Some of them can't wait to get their hands on it because it cuts through with the banks, some of the KYC processes. And I hold the view that when people see that ease, it'll have organic take-up. Cayman Finance had a digital tech forum a couple weeks ago, an exciting overseas guest speaker. And coincidentally, she had helped New York with their EID. And she planted a thought in my mind, Mr. Speaker, when she said, look, I understand ministries and governments will want to try to do everything at once, maybe trying to know that if they've been working on a project and this is their opportunity, if they have a elected official that is going to help them champion it and they've been waiting for years for it, to try to do all of it at once. But she made the case that sometimes that's just not practical. And she used the word, just think sometimes of experimentation. Get it to those who've been asking for it, who've been begging for it, and let the community see how it made their lives easy. That way, you reduce the workload of the relevant agencies that are trying to produce it to an amount or a target that might not be achievable, a more reasonable target to get it into people's hands so that you will build momentum for others to take it up. And I think that's the strategy that we are going to follow, to do this in phases, to eventually start with the young, older persons. The deputy leader of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, mentioned prisoners coming out who have done their time. They too struggle to make it through the system, get it into their hands, and eventually we think that the momentum will build for future phases where it goes in the hands of civil servants, public servants, financial services, commerce folks who want nothing more than to have this in their hands yesterday. Also, in the area of investment, Mr. Speaker, I really marvel at the work of the Center of Business Development, a small but mighty unit that runs a lot of programs that probably don't get enough airtime. I'll go through them quickly. They have a Grow Your Business program that helps those startups that have made it through the startup program and teaches them how to expand and get to the next phase to grow their business. They do a small business expo. This event covers small businesses and gives them the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to showcase their products, their services to the public, and to share their experience with others who are starting out. They organize a Raise Capital Forum, where the center is acutely aware of the challenge to access capital when you're a micro or small business. And they put you in a forum designed where they bring investors and financial institutions to the table, Mr. Speaker, and give those business owners an opportunity to spot talent, to spot an idea, and help a small budding business get going. And we will be adding money to the budget, Mr. Speaker, for a business development grant program where the ministry will have a modest sum, where we also too will disperse when we see an idea and we want to help a micro or small business get started. Because ultimately, that's the type of investment that we're looking for and aiming for in the community that helps our people participate more in the economy. There's a few tools that we'll also try to experiment with to do. I brought a paper to caucus recently to establish a working group for a so-called hybrid fund. Now, in a nutshell, it's a fancy term for a smaller version of a joint public-private partnership, where you identify small projects, perhaps, for example, where government owns Crown land and needs access to have transitional housing. So this isn't affordable housing, Mr. Speaker. This is where any of the social services departments have an emergency, either a domestic abuse case, a family squabble, and the person needs to get out and needs not to be homeless immediately. The existing framework that the needs assessment use of relying on private landlords doesn't move that quickly. We need to ensure that there's transitional housing, particularly, Mr. Speaker, for those same prisoners that are coming out who will also find it difficult to rent property. We need to start thinking of innovative tools to work with the private sector so it isn't reliant just on government, to form those partnerships and be able to start transitional or social housing in the country. Now, Mr. Speaker, I had a few recent but separate conversations from a few folks that are retiring. One is a retired civil servant, was a retiring investment funds director, and a couple of retired corporate lawyers who are interested in still volunteering to make a difference in the community and strengthen the safety net. Even though these conversations were separate, they had the same theme, that innovation isn't just about the creation of a new device or gadget, it's modifications to existing items in more creative, user-friendly ways for this decade. And they offered to create a working group that would look at items that may be smaller, not as topical, but may need a revisit. For example, they raised the workman's comp legislation, the Limitation Act, or whether certain time bans for claims are still fit for modern purpose, the Landlord and Tenants Act, whether that needs to be strengthened for more protections for tenants. All of those acts that I just mentioned were all last touched on in the mid to late 90s. And I know that the Premier is working on a new tenancy bill to actually improve that sector, because there is a gap now, particularly because the Needs Assessment Unit is working on or working with private landlords, that needs a revisit. So all of those things taken together, on the one hand, the economic opportunities that I see for the country from financial services and commerce, and all the things that need a revamp that are long overdue from an investment, innovation, and social development standpoint, we have the tools to reshape this country. Maybe we won't get it all done, Mr. Speaker, in one budget cycle, but the framework can be laid. Victories can be won. And I can't do it alone, Mr. Speaker. I thank the members of caucus, cabinet, members of this House. I thank the chief officers in both ministries, all of the staff, both of my PAs, all of the authorities and departments for which I have responsibility. At DG, I wanted to make one particular point here. In either ministry team, whenever they hit a snag or a setback, they always look down and worried about whether or not they will disappoint me, whether it'll be upsetting. But I try to remind them that for some of these projects, no one's ever gotten this far, ever. So don't think about it in terms of disappointment. What will matter more is how we are going to analyze those setbacks and snags and overcome them and keep moving on and keep the country moving forward. And I couldn't be prouder, DG, of both teams. Turning very briefly, Mr. Speaker, to my constituency of West Bay South, I've said it before in many different arenas. It is the honor of my life to represent them. It gives me joy to press whomever, whenever I can, to get things done for them. There's a few issues that I cannot wait to see resolved in the coming months in the next budget cycle. Hopefully some of them are done before the end of the year. The St. Mary's Cemetery on Willie Farrington Drive, another unfinished project. Beautiful parking lot, terrible cemetery. Needs to be fixed. Now, with the help of my colleague, the Minister for Home Affairs, and her very able Director, Richard Sims, plan is in place, capital has been transferred, and hopefully that has a much more dignified look for our people when they bury their loved ones at that cemetery. Yes, PWD, where I really need them is what you said, Minister for Planning, is that dock. Morgan's Harbor dock. And like you said, I'm glad you said it. We don't want the old wooden rickety one that could blow over with the next nor'wester. Our local operators want that beautiful concrete one you got in Northside. We want that one in West Bay. Thank you. And hopefully we see it this week or next week, the paving of Powell Smith Drive. That's correct. That's on the work order. Thank you. Those are some pain points for our people. I'd like to thank the staff of my constituency office. They take, just like I'm sure for many of us, the brunt of calls, visitors, while we're off busy with policy, legislation, and other duties. I couldn't do it without them, and I thank them. At this point, I want to give a very warm Christmas holiday greeting to the constituents of West Bay South. I'm looking forward to an expeditious finance committee so I can spend as much time greeting as many of you as I can in person. I'd like to also, Mr. Speaker, give a quick shout out to my old man who is in a bit of an aftercare in Hull City. He needed a surgery which was performed brilliantly at HSA, but he needed a bit more care in terms of rehabilitating him from the surgery. He's probably not listening. He'll probably listen later, but I just want him to know that I'm thinking about it. So finally, Mr. Speaker, I will leave Shakespeare alone. I did 2. Should be enough. I'm on time, Madam Premier. I'm going to go to a historical figure that I quote more often. I never really use Shakespeare. Who has numerous witty quotes, maybe not as much as Churchill, but close. I'm going to end with Abraham Lincoln, who said, quote, before speaking about the U.S., "If this nation is ever destroyed, it will not be from without, but from within." I'll repeat that one more time. Abraham Lincoln, former U.S. president. If this nation is ever destroyed, it will be not from without, but from within. The central challenge is in our hands, colleagues. I give the current Honorable Premier full marks for completing the presentation of a budget in highly compressed fashion. We should all thank her for it. This would be a different place if we were past the 31st of December. Thank you, ma'am. But the past is the past. Let's reach across the aisle. Mr. Speaker, let's find compromise. And let's, per the title of the Honorable Premier's budget address, lay the foundation for our people's well-being. Thank you and good night, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Deputy Premier, and for keeping it so brief. Does any other member wish to speak? The member, Honorable Member from Bordentown West.
We don't need this. The people of the Cayman Islands, Mr. Speaker, are the 6 words that are the preamble to the Cayman Islands Constitution. 6 words that can be summarized down into 3 words. We the people. Mr. Speaker, our Constitution as it stands is broken down into 9 parts. Part 1 deals with the Bill of Rights. Part 2 deals with the governor. Part 3 deals with the executive. Part 4 deals with this legislative assembly. Part 5 deals with the judicial branch. Part 6 deals with the public service. Part 7 deals with finance. Part 8 deals with institutions supporting democracy. And Part 9 is miscellaneous. And my focus here tonight is not just on the Part 4, where we're gathered, but also what is required in Part 3 with the executive. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I have to give a lot of credit to the Honorable Premier for what she has produced and what she has put out there. I can tell anyone that I have worked with her. I know where her heart is, and I also know of her capabilities. And as I said the last time I spoke into this chamber, it's the first time in months that I have a sense of optimism. And, Mr. Speaker, my optimism was even further enhanced when just this evening I could text one of my constituents to say that your prayers have been answered. One of my constituents reached out to me earlier, Mr. Speaker, asking if there was any uplift or anything for pensioners who didn't receive anything. And shortly after getting a message from that constituent, I messaged the Honorable Premier. I mean, at that time, she said she could make a commitment. She had to see where the numbers came out first, which I will admit is the responsible thing to do. But then it took me great pleasure to text that person to say your prayers have been answered. And she's very grateful for that little $250 for this Christmas. You see, Mr. Speaker, I've listened to the tone and the theme of many speeches here in this Parliament. And the one thing I want to touch on when I mention those 3 words, we the people, is the 3 pillars that make up any society. I've said before in this House, Mr. Speaker, most countries started out at a community level. And as they start trading amongst themselves and doing business amongst themselves, they create an economy. And as the community grew and the economy grew, they created a political system. So the 3 pillars, Mr. Speaker, is community, economy, political. That has been the genesis of the birth of most nations. And what has been happening around the world, Mr. Speaker, is that they are one event, well, several events, but one particular thing has happened that has never happened before in the history of human civilization. And that is, this is the first time where we have 4 generations working together side by side. It is now not uncommon to find an 18-year-old working alongside an 81-year-old. And as such, Mr. Speaker, I'm reminded of a story that, while it didn't originate on this side of the world, but on the Middle East, but they have kind of brought it over to this side. And it was a story that my son, a while back, had put in our family chat group, where this guy said he went to visit his coach. And his coach said to him that our grandfather walked 10 miles to work. My father walked 5 miles. He says, I'm driving a Cadillac. My son is driving a Mercedes. My grandson is driving a Ferrari. But my great-grandson will be walking again. And he said, tough times create tough people. Tough people create easy time. Easy time create weak people. And weak people create tough times. And that is why we need to create warriors. It basically takes 4 generations, Mr. Speaker, for that cycle to happen. And now we're living through the 4th generation in some cases. About 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine sent me a video where this young person and these new millennials are, I don't know the name that they have for them, but they were basically complaining, why is it that they don't want to work? And it's not that they're not lazy, but they don't see where they're being properly compensated for their labor for what it is that they're doing. Basically, they're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, still can't afford to live, can't afford to own their own place and everything else. And they basically went on to lament the fact that the previous generations or the earlier generations, which in essence would be my parents, is that they're getting all the benefits. And I thought about that video for a while, but then something clicked to me. That generation fought for what they had. They fought for the unions. I mean, you go back, you can go back where people can remember the days of Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters and all that kind of stuff, regardless of what it is that they say. But they fought for the rights that they have. They fought for what it is that they wanted. They made noise. And they built institutions that came out of them fighting for those noise. And then, as times go on and new generations emerge, I'm old enough to remember when my parents had to basically tell me to come off the street. Now I have to beg my kids to go out the house. Things have changed. And, the same conversations out of my late father, the same conversation out of my son. Oh, Daddy, you live in a different time. We just don't understand what's going on. The world is different now. And he's probably right. But then I remember what Reagan said when someone said that to him, where one young person at one of those college campuses said to him that he wouldn't understand the world that you're living in now because you got instant communication, you can microwave food, you can do this, you can do that. Listen to all the technological stuff. Reagan said, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. That's why we invented it. And it's the same thing now, in the sense that we as a people, we need to sit down and ask ourselves the question, where do we stand with each of those pillars? Everyone here spoke about the economic growth, which is good. We're talking about governance, we're talking about politics. But where most countries have fallen down and continue to fall down, and if we are not careful, we're going to fall the same way as other countries, is the investment within the community. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to go off in a little side right now when I say something that people may not like. But one of the underlying tenets that made our community strong was our churches. They did the bulk of the legwork at the community. They were the ones that were running after school programs. They were the ones that were doing all of these things before everybody who spring up all of these different initiatives that making all of this money, the church was there. And we have sat down, and just as though the church has been undermined, the community has been undermined. And I can tell you, right now, if you look inside the United Kingdom, there are no converting churches to apartments. People stop going. And that is where everyone met in this country, whether you're rich, poor, black, white, brown, everybody met at the church. We're now losing that. And if we are not careful, we're going to go the same road of everybody else, where we have built up those two pillars, and the community has been left behind. And I'm going to say this, colleagues, and the Honorable Deputy Premier said it, when people do not feel like they can participate, I can tell you, they go out and they elect people that tell them what they want to hear. And I'm going to say this, while those countries have the ability, when things go sideways, to go in a back room and print money and pay themselves where, print themselves out of trouble, we do not have that luxury. No country in our position who have been where we are and fall has ever returned. None. Zero, zilch, nada. And as such, this is where we need to get back to, is at the community level of caring and sharing. I was speaking to the Honorable Leader of the Opposition during the break, and we were going through some of the numbers and everything else. And I was reminding him to some extent that while we depend on the numbers, and I want to say up front right now, the ESO staff is very hardworking, and they do the job to the best of their ability. But what I'm about to say is for the listening public. You need to cooperate with the Economic and Statistics Office. They are the ones that are producing the numbers for policymakers. And I want to just touch on something here from the 2022 Compendium of Statistics, Mr. Speaker. Not something that's long, but just to kind of give you an example. We're talking about the labor force, Caymanians versus non-Caymanians, but I'm just going to focus on the Caymanian numbers. 2015, 19,575. 2016, 20,774. 2017, 20,774. 2018, 21,747. 2019, 21,269. 2020, 21,249. 2021, 21,298. 2022, 35,691. So we've basically gone from 21,249 in 2020 to 21,298 in 2021 to 35,691 in 2022. That's just the Caymanian numbers. And what happened between 2021 and those numbers? We had the census, where we actually went out and had a proper count in terms of what the population was. And outside of a census, the team relies on the public corporation to provide them information. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that even during the census, we had people within our own community who just outright said, we're not giving you that information, despite the protection. And I gotta be honest with you, I actually wanted to prosecute some of them just to send a message, because the law does allow us to do it. But there was no appetite for it, and I leave it as is. But the point I'm making is this, and I say this to the public. For us to do our job and make an informed decision, we need the information from you. And it can't be a situation where only half of you are responding and just putting the stuff out there. You need to provide the information, because we make decisions based on that. Because equally, I can tell you, when I look at the unemployed Caymanian numbers, it went from 1,700 and something pre-census to 800 and something as per the census. So then I sit back and then I say to myself, it's okay, it's only 800 Caymanians unemployed. It gives us at least an idea And I can tell you the ESO does wonderful jobs. Because you can literally go through and look at those, all the different years in a compendium of statistics, and see what industries are growing, what industries are moving. But the point is, we need the information. And as you can see from the material jump, it can't be where the census, every 10 years when we do the census, that is when we get the correct information. That's 2.5 political terms right there. We can't run the risk of having misinformation. Mr. Speaker, part of building our community is also about building institutions. For too long, everything that we have done, and Cayman is not the only place, has been based on individual politics. And when institutions are being built, they are very unpopular at first, till people understand their significance. The member for West Bay West can tell you, and I think, and the Premier too, was back in 2003, 2002, when they were creating Cineco. The political licks that they took for that, for creating Cineco. Almost 20 years later, Mr. Speaker, if it wasn't for Cineco, many Caymanians would not have insurance. But there was licks that came with setting it up. And the reason for this, Mr. Speaker, and I'll give you a quote from Machiavelli, since I know the honorable member for Northside had mentioned Machiavelli. More than 500 years ago, Machiavelli said, the most difficult challenge in the history of human affairs is to change the established order of things, because those who will be disadvantaged by the change are certain of their loss, and while those who will benefit from the change are uncertain of their gain. Madam Speaker, one of the things, and colleagues, I will say this much into the listening public, after I completed my review of the budget last weekend, it was around 3-something Monday morning, I sent the Honorable Premier a message and I said, I do have some concerns with the budget. A lot of them are technical in nature. And rather than raise those technical issues on the floor, I will send her a letter after the budget process for her to meet with her team and the technocrats to go through those issues. Because I think at the end of the day, this is more from a policy standpoint that we need to be focusing on. And some of those stuff, I don't want to get in the technical side of it. But what really triggered that for me is when I look at NGS 55 and HEA 2. For the 2024 and 2025 budget, the total amount that's included is $57 million for both NGS 55 and HEA 2 in those 2 years. Equally, Mr. Speaker, the actual spend, or the actual forecasted spend for NGS 55 and HEA 2 for 2022 and 2023 is $158 million. So in short, Mr. Speaker, for 2 votes over a 2-year period, we were spent $158 million. We have on a budget of $57 million. That's a difference of $101 million. And why did that jump out? The combined surplus for both years is actually $94.5 million. So in short, Mr. Speaker, those 2 votes alone, just on the health care, can impact this country severely. And so I was very happy when I heard the Honorable Minister for Health spoke about reforming the HSA. Because I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, the HSA does very good work, and there is no doubt about it, and I can tell anybody is that I can't see any situation or any universe where the HSA will not be the primary provider for health care in the country. But equally at the same time, Mr. Speaker, it has to be efficient. And the reason why I raise that, Mr. Speaker, is that if you look at the current forecasted surplus for the SAGCs as per what was presented, they're actually showing a profit for 2023 to combine for all the SAGCs. But then in the budget for both years is actually showing a loss within the SAGCs. And what I've said before isn't unique, but one of the things that when you do look at the HSA, 70% of their revenues come from the Cayman Islands government, and only 30% is external to the Cayman Islands government. And when we do look at administrative costs, For that is a serious mismatch. In short, Mr. Speaker, memory serves me right, when I looked at the one analysis that we looked at, based on some numbers that were submitted to us, we had roughly 60 million in costs for the HSA administratively to collect roughly $30 million of non-government revenues. That is something that is unsustainable. And when we're looking at a point now where things are tough, we need to look at efficiencies. So I think it's one of those situations where the minister is on the right path in the sense of moving it back to a public hospital. And there's no shame in saying at the time when the decision was made to create the HSA, it was based on information that was available back then. Now it's a different story. And nowhere is there see more evidence, Mr. Speaker, is when on the recent pension issue. When people said, oh, if you allow people to take money out of their pension now, what's going to happen when they go to retire? What do you think is happening right now? You think $158 million that we just spent in the last 2 years, we think it's on? It's mostly on people who have already retired. As the Honorable Leader of the Opposition mentioned, we have an aged population. This is something that we really need to sit down and tackle. So it's about creating these structures, but at the same time, bringing back institutions. And the more institutions that we can create, when we do leave this honorable house, those institutions remain. The Honorable Gilbert McLean, that hails from my constituency, will sit down and he will tell you when he was creating NRA, it was an issue. Look at what NRA is doing today. Look at the Airports Authority. Look at Synaco. These are institutions that have remained. And the more institutions that we can create and move away from the individual, it's very easy. Look at SEMA. Same thing again too. Going back to a monetary authority as opposed to a central bank, very good work that they do there. Again, institutions that we have created. But where we need to start creating institutions now is within the community. And rather than reinvent the wheel, Mr. Speaker, let us re-engage the churches. Let us get the churches back into our community for the work that they do. When I sit down and I think about the possibilities that we have in this country, let me tell you something. One of the very first persons that I will call his name, that said to me, Chris, the Cayman Islands is a blessed place, was Michael Alberga. I remember going to him and I was looking his guidance on something. And this is way before politics. And Michael looked at me and he says, Chrissy, let me tell you something about Cayman. You're young. He said, this place is a blessed place. He said, the amount of prayers that are in the Cayman prayer banks for your forefathers. He said, Chris, this country will never fail. Because some of the decisions that some of these people made, this country should have been worse than Haiti. But because of the grace of God. So it's all of these problems that they worrying about, God love Cayman. I can tell you that. Don't worry about it. God will take care of it. And it's fine. Faith is good. And I was surprised when a person like, Alberga had that kind of, I didn't expect that from Michael Alberga. Truth be told, I just didn't expect it. That has never been his personality. But it goes to show something that even he himself recognizes the power of faith. And when people get up, Mr. Speaker, and they bash the church, I ask people the question. I worked with atheists before, and I said to them, what is wrong with working with someone who get up and say they want to be Christ-like? They want to do good. Why you want to take that from them? Why? Someone said, I want to do good, I want to be kind, I want to be generous, I want to be clean, I want to... What bother is it to you if someone says they want to live like that? And as the Honorable Deputy Premier mentioned a while ago when he quoted Lincoln, when he's talking about being destroyed from within, the full context of that speech, he was actually referring to what had happened to the war in Europe, with Napoleon and talking about Bonaparte and everything else. And he says not one European country will ever be able to take a drink from the Ohio River or walk one of those trails unless the American people allow them to do that. And it's the same thing with us. The only person who can destroy what we have here is us. And I say to very new Caymanians who come and want to change our way of life, you left where you were to come here for better opportunities. Why are you trying to change here to where you left? There's a reason you left. Let us work our magic. Let us do our thing. Just come for the ride. If you're going to drink milk, drink milk. Don't count cows. That's what it comes down to. So, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, as I said to the Madam Premier, there are concerns I have. I see the size of the civil service number. It frightened me. But at first, I sit back and I say, wait a minute, back up. Chris, maybe that includes your the pay increase that you want for your civil servants. But I'll find that out in the Finance Committee. And I really hope that that is the case, because I can tell you, if it's a situation of hiring people and growing bodies, then that's going to be a challenge. But if we're going to hire people, Madam Premier, I will ask to give priority to returning graduates. There is nothing worse than our young people coming home and can't find work. They have worked very hard for 3-4 years to get that degree, only to come back home and some of them sitting down there losing their dignity. So, Madam Premier, I have gone through the different budget numbers that were presented, and I have made a list of different things based on the ministries that I would like for each person to look at. As Mr. Speaker reminded me very early in politics, there's no future in the past. And the budget that we have here today is a budget for 2024 and 2025, which is in the future. So while I'm happy to hear what has happened, nonetheless, I would like to, as the Honorable Deputy Mayor said, that's in the past. What we hear about now is the future. And I will start with, coincidentally, the Minister for Social Development, is that in his ministries, he's charged with, more than anything, is giving our people back their dignity, closing the dignity gap. And I'm very happy to see the change that he has made in the financial legislation, in financial assistance legislation, because I can tell you one thing, there's nothing that used to be worse than to hear the word poor relief. I mean, the dignity that is taken from some people, it takes from us as a community. We were a community of caring and sharing. It wasn't about poor people or rich people. It's about everyone doing everything to help someone. So I'm happy to see that progress has been made in that regard. But at the same time, what we need to do is make sure that we make it much easier for people, that they don't feel as if though they're giving up their dignity. One of the things I was very pleased is when the Minister for Border Control and Labour spoke about the Select Committee on Pensions. And that is important, Mr. Speaker, for the simple sense that one of the things that we don't have in this country is a safety net. And the Minister for Financial Services will understand when we speak about international standards. Because one international standard that we have not done a very good job at is bringing in stuff for employees. So as we push more international standards, I'm going to ask for us to comprehensively take a look at the international standard in terms of employee benefits, which include maternity leave and everything else, and even minimum vacation leave. But more importantly, is to start creating that fund, and during, I guess, Finance Committee, we can ask it a little bit more. But we need to create a safety net for people, because at the end of the day, 95% of our people make their living from providing a service. And God forbid that anyone gets sick to the point that they can't work. Most families would be one medical emergency away from being bankrupt. And I can tell you, that is the kind of things that keep people awake at night. So if we can work in terms of putting together a safety net, and it doesn't have to be something overnight, because at the end of the day, colleagues, we don't need to score a goal every time we go on the field. Our job as a parliament is to keep moving the ball closer to that goal. Keep moving the ball closer to that goal. So eventually, we will get there. It doesn't have to be that magic pill. And the good news about it is, every one of us inside here have one thing in common. We all trust the public. Why? Because they voted for us over our opponent. So just as though we can trust them to have done the right thing by sending us here, let us trust them in that regard. I can tell you, they see the news. They see the problems. They know what's going on in the world. They know we don't have the answer for everything. They know we're not going to fix everything overnight. But here's what they do know. Or here's what they want to know, is that one, we're the problem. Two, or plan to fix the problem. And three, tomorrow is going to be better. People want hope. They don't want the bad news bearer. I know you've seen a lot of people just rejecting that negative, the negative. No one wants that. So it is from that standpoint. Moving on to my good friend, the Minister for Tourism, and Mr. George on Central himself, I will say to him, the person who came in together with me in the class of 2017, activate that ability to dream big. The last time you and I spoke about tourism, you talked about 1 million stable tourists by 2035. I was listening for that. I want that minister back. I remember his exact words where he said to his team, listen, what would it take for us to get 1 million by 2035? How much rooms do we need? Do we need now, just right now we have 7,000 rooms, 7,000 properties, 10,000 rooms, 20,000 beds. How much do we need to achieve that? Then the next question to the public, where do you want to put it? Then you say to the Minister of Infrastructure, what infrastructure are you going to put in between the room start, the airport and everything? That's the vision that we want. Because at the end of the day, financial services is nice and it's the bread and butter. But we all see what can happen overnight too in some situations. But we have a very good tourism product and we have a lot of people passionate in it. So, and as I said to him when he invited me to one board meeting with his Cayman Airways people, the minute we extend that runaway, if the people from the Middle East or the Far East don't want to come here, well, get a 767 for Cayman Airways, go over there, develop the route, and the minute they see that there's stuff here, they will come. I'm going to tell you, Cayman Airways has taken a lot of hit negatively and uncalled for. And for those of us who travel the Caribbean and see what's happening, I would say to people listening at home, if you're in Turks and Caicos, go and look at an airline flight from Miami to Turks and Caicos and see how much that run. $2,000, $1,500, $2,000. And you complain about Cayman Airways baggage fee for a $300 flight to Miami when somebody's paying $2,000 for the same flight in a different island for almost the same period of time. Yeah. So again, this is why we inside there need to actually go out and have these conversations. And what I said earlier about the stats is for the media people also to do their own work. They go up and they put all of these numbers around, and I can tell you some of the analysis changed simply because of the census. And rather than report that, they're looking for sensationalism. Guys, let me tell you something. Bad news is what sells news, What is the last thing you said, a positive headline? You know why that is? Because people just like to know, they feel miserable as long as, boy, things rough, but my God, that one over there, his life worse than mine, But I wouldn't want to be him. We need to get away from that. So I will tell you, one of the things I remember, and I also just want to say to my friend, the Minister of Tourism and Ports, look at where we can create more attractions. People give Turtle Farm a hard time. And if you look at Turtle Farm subsidy, the last time I looked at this analysis, which was a while back, the true subsidy for Cayman Turtle Farm at the time when the government was paying $10 million a year, $6 million went to service in debt. So the true subsidy was really $4 million. What do we get for that $4 million? A place that hires 100 Caymanians directly, 600 Caymanians indirectly, and have over 200,000 visitors a year. For $4 million, that's a bargain for what tourism does. Some entities can lose money if they're providing a bigger service because you can't put a price on the other benefits that they bring, same as with Cayman Airways. Cayman Airways is an economic accelerator. If Cayman Airways go down tomorrow, what do you think waiting on us? The $2,000 flight, thank you. If you go and you look right now, you study the airline business out of North America, colleagues, they actually operate like banks. They're no longer in the transport business. They make more money from the loyalty programs than they actually lose money selling seats. They don't make money from a plane seat. They make money from the loyalty program. How can you as a small country compete with that? So my friend, dream big. Give me that million by 2035. Maybe it's a private conversation. Maybe you didn't want to say it because someone think you're crazy. But you know what? Dream big. That's what made Cayman what it is. That's all right. You'll get it back now. To my to the Minister of Health, I already touched on it briefly already, and I said, getting back the HSA to a public hospital, I think that's a very good going back to a government department, I think that's actually a very good step. But again, the one thing I wanted, two things else I want to add to that is one, the free health care. Because I can tell you right now, if you look at what we're spending right now, $158 million over 2 years, at that price, at that cost, you might as well just start looking at making it free and just taking the stress off of people. Because just about of $30 million of non-government costs, you might as well look at that, and then you can start cutting down some of the administrative costs. It will pay for itself. But the one thing, colleagues, and the census revealed this more than anything, is focusing on wellness. Our culture and our lifestyle have created some issues for us. And it's kind of ironic that the things that are mostly not covered by the SHIC plan are the things that are now giving our people the hardest time. And this is one reason why we actually want to expand Cineco, but I'll come down to that later on. But again, it's the focus on wellness. Take care of yourself. I can tell you right now, last week Wednesday, I was up by Health City, and it's 2 needles that they stick down my throat testing for something. The week before, pain had hit me so bad. Like really hit me. I ended up by Health City. I thought literally I was getting a heart attack or something. But first of all, when these things come, the first thing you think is gas. Because as Caribbean people, maybe gas. You start to eat anything hot all day, you go through that. But after the pain hit me, I said, oh no, this is not normal. And I wasn't taking no chances. I went straight up by Health City because just in case it was cardiac. Turns out it wasn't not like that, but they ran some tests. But I can tell you this much. But I can say this much. The response from Cineco during that time was literally nothing short of phenomenal. And I can tell you they got a good team over there with a good, decent CEO in Michael Gale. I can tell you this country is blessed to have Michael Gale running Cineco. I can tell anybody that. And his faith alone in the way in which he moves is really something commendable. To my good friend, the Minister of Infrastructure and Roads, and who's building my park and everything else. And I heard my video man working on that clip for all the stuff you already promised me. You don't worry, that's coming out. But the undersea cable is a big thing. Now, I don't need to get into the politics of why we are where we are with it. But all I can say is that the biggest problem that we had with the undersea cable has been removed. That's all I would say. So I expect some progress on it. Exactly. I will say that. But one of the things I also want to touch on, Mr. Speaker, that is on the responsibility for the Minister of Housing also, is the houses that are being built. And credit to the Deputy Leader of Opposition when he brought the motion in the last sitting, or sorry, the sitting before, where we're talking about incentivizing developers to get stuff done. This is something the government can't do, and the government, frankly, shouldn't be doing to some extent. I mean, we have people out there who can qualify in the banks to actually get this done. And like I said, if we have the land and we can give it to people to say, you know what, let's build on it, let's work on something, work something with the developer where we subsidize the cost of land or something. But it needs to be done. And yes, I know there's a red tape in the minister that's mentioned in terms of the procurement process, but guess what? There's a procurement law. And the last time I checked, laws are made in this building. So and it's fine, listen, that's the beauty about democracy. If you put something in and it's not working or it's not working to the benefit it should, we change it. That's what it's there for. So But I would say this much. The next thing that I want him again, that now you can focus on, because the biggest impediment is gone, is the government discount store. You understand me? So I expect to see some progress at that now. Okay, thank you very much. And I have to say, well done in terms of the road network and everything else. I really have to give him props there. So the Minister for Heritage and Sports and everything else, one of the things I've always argued is that Cayman's secret to our success has never been immigration. It has been integration. The ability for people to come here and integrate with us. I'm old enough to remember when Oxtail was something that Cayman would not consider their own. Now, not only is Oxtail something big for us, we started it here. Granted, we can't afford it, but again, this is part of where culture comes in. But one of the things that we need to focus on is selling people on our heritage, getting people to feel a part of the community. Because I can tell you, that's how it used to be. And you know, it's funny, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but a friend of mine in an overseas territory sent a WhatsApp to me by mistake. And in a nutshell, they wanted me to look at something. But I was surprised to find out that in that overseas territory, for people who were getting status, they had to put their picture back in the newspaper and basically said that, you know, I and so is applying for and I'm looking at them like, well, you guys still do that? We took it away here because they say some human rights issue or something. They're still doing it. But it goes to show part of being in the community in the sense of, you don't even know who is who anymore. And it's because we have changed our hours in design. We were going from the front porch to the back porch. You used to stand in the front porch, you see who passing by, you know, you don't know who your neighbors are. You know, and I would say to the public sometimes, you know, when you complain about, you know, politicians not keeping enough events, when we spend money to do events, many of you don't show up. You know, and it takes a lot of time. And especially worse when you bring out other public servants there to do a presentation too, and nobody shows up. And of course, for us as politicians now, you know, you have your political opponents out there. The minute no one shows up, the first thing they're like, you're not going to support. The seats start looking different. So, you know, people look at that those are the natural behaviors. But this is people time, this is people money. You know, so one of the things I'll also invite the Minister for Sports and Heritage to also focus on is to find some money to get more Caymanians to write. I would love to see Dr. Steve Macfield write a book with all his knowledge. I mean, those are the kind of things. I mean, I've sat down, I've listened to some people with some stories, and I wish I had a tape recorder sometime to just record what it is that they have. But these are the kind of things that we need to sit down and start getting, even if you don't want to write, record them and get someone else to write it. But we can't allow some of these people to just transition without recording their history. And as the old African proverb says, every time an elder passes, it's like a library burning down. You know what I mean? So I'm not going to say, don't wait till it's too late. You know, pay the person, pay to get it done. I mean, Roy Borden, I love his books. I love the way in which he writes. And I encourage, I wish some of them, at least all of them, would be as part of the school curriculum and everything else for people to understand, you know, from whence we came. Guys, colleagues, we are a small island, but we have come very far in a very short time. We have much to be proud of. But if we are not careful, 40, 50 years from now, someone will rewrite our own story. Let us write our own story. Because I guarantee, as I think Churchill said it best, history is going to be kind to me because I intend to write it myself. Let us do that for ourselves. Let us be kind to our own Caymanians. Let's write our own story. So a good colleague, the Minister for Sustainability, I gotta be honest with you right now. I still don't understand our ministry. I'm going to be straight up. When it was created, I understand what they wanted to in terms of focus, but I think it has to be properly defined. You know? Well, we all know where it got created. That's why I'm not going into that. But what I will say is that sustainability as a place that we need to get to. And a lot of it has to be the public education and so forth. But one of the things I know is going to be a big project, and that is on the region, which I know other people are looking at. And I wrote a letter to the Honorable Attorney General, I think about 5 or 6 pages on the region. And I'm hoping that before the Christmas is out or early in the new year, the Honorable Attorney General could at least answer those questions for me. I gave him a pass the last time because I knew he was busy getting Cayman off the grey list. So, and it's Christmas time now, but at least early in the new year, I will still have some questions, and Minister, I'd be more than happy to share that letter with you. And if any of your colleagues want, you have my permission to share it with them also. At the end of the day, the public business can't be done in private. But one of the things I will say, and this is for the environmentalists and for everyone out there, we always talk about banning plastics and everything else. It's hard for some people to take it serious enough, because when people talk about banning plastic, they also talk about, and I'm going to say, banning styrofoam. Nobody ever wants to touch the styrofoam or the S word. I don't want to say it. And we all know why. But what I can say, and I would really like for Minister, and I have full faith and confidence in you, I've worked with you before, is taking that ministry now and defining it into something properly. It has a lot of potential, but I think a lot of it was spent on too much time hindering development. And I'm going to tell you right now, as per the last census, 15% of our workforce is employed in the construction industry. That's the largest employer. We run a consumption-based society. If people cannot work, they can't eat, and if they're not eating, our revenue is going down too. So, Minister, I know you're back new and everything else. Any assistance that I can offer you, I'd be more than happy to, in terms of redefining it. I think it has a lot of potential. It's the youngest ministry, it's the newest ministry. It's barely over 2 years old, but I think it's something that can be done. Because at the end of the day, it is one of those ministries that will become almost the backbone as like the Ministry of Finance. No, that's not happening. Listen, I like my freedom, you know. To my colleague from Bordentown East, my neighbor in Bordentown East, and the Minister for Border Control and Labour, although the immigration reform has already been worked on, the pension reform. But as I mentioned earlier before, we need to get the labour up to international standards. And we can't have people working in the workplace and in some cases are being treated very, very poorly and not being paid a proper wage. And I'm going to say something, colleagues. People don't like when I say it, but I'm going to say it. And I'm speaking to my Caymanians. The way some of you treat your domestic helpers, you all need to stop. Pay them on time. They got families back home to feed. Stop letting them pay back for their work permit and everything else. I mean, no one wants to talk about it because at the end of the day, we're going to have something with voters. But I can tell you something, guys. This is what we call blessing blockers. When you treat some people this way, and then something's happened to you or the family members, they want it, these are the kind of stuff. Karma exists. Karma is real. Some of you take advantage of the domestics. They need to stop it. And Minister, I'm going to ask you, as we mentioned before, when we're putting together the minimum wage committee, is to carve out the domestics, because a lot of people are worried about that cost being gone, which we mentioned. But equally, Madam Premier, one black mark we're going to have on ourselves is that is one section of people who do not pay any pension. And it's disgraceful that some of them, after 30, 40 years of caring for our loved ones, giving us our best years, go back home with nothing. And I'm going to ask the government to consider taking the funds that we make from work permits on domestics, put it in a special fund, and let us see what we can do with some of these people, especially when they reach a particular age and going back home. The amount of people that have worked, helped us to reach where we are, our children benefited from it, have returned home and are living in some really bad conditions. I know people who still sending money back to their helpers in their old age back home, but it is something that we need to look at as a people, as a country. But they are allowed, they're the ones that we leave with our loved ones, and they allow us to be in here to all hours of the night, and other Cayman families to go out and provide for their family. But we need to do a better job at that. And I would really and truly like, Minister, for you to look into something like that, because some of those are, I would probably say, some of the conditions are, I would probably say, on a human rights basis. I've heard some stories, and some of the people who are doing it, I'm ashamed at them. I look at them, I just pass them like I don't see them. I'm just ashamed. They smile up, they laugh up to you like upstanding citizen, and what way they're treating their helpers is really bad. And last but not least, a good friend, the Honorable Premier. Madam Premier, you have been in this house probably, well, way longer than me, for certain. And what I'm about to say is not new. But the one thing I will say to you with your new UPM government is the special interests. If we are not careful, the special interests will continue to do a lot more damage to this country. I know I'd have to say, matter of fact, I shouldn't even mention that because I know you don't go to the cocktail parties. So you know what, I'm not going to worry about that. You can scratch that. The other thing, thank you. Yeah. The other thing, Madam Premier, is the civil service management. Now, I want to preamble that to say this. In our system of government, the Westminster system, the civil service is charged with the continuation of government. In the United States, it's the Senate. How did they do that? That's why at every election in the US, only a third of the Senate goes up for election at a time. 2/3 of the Senate is always in session, never facing the polls, and that is where the continuation of government is charged. When a new government comes in, it is the civil servants that are there to bring them up to speed. Now, I've been blessed or I've been lucky in the sense that I've had really good chief officers that gave me that big binder, that gave everything that they were working on before, and gave me a chance to catch up. But I know...
Honourable Member, I've been trying to wait for you to catch your breath so I could intervene, but it doesn't seem you're going to do that. So I wonder if you could indicate how much longer you think you might be.
15 minutes, 10, 15.
Because I know you're not the shortest man I know.
Sorry, 10, 15 minutes, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, I'll hold you to that.
Yeah, sorry. I was wrapping up and I was right on the Premier. So I was coming on to the last part. It's charged with the continuation of government. And that is important to some extent. And it's one of those situations where I know the civil service has their own programs and workshops and so forth to prepare chief officers, deputy chief officers, and ministry staff. But I can tell you from the time I was there, I saw that as a challenge. And the reason why I mentioned that is that there was a time in our history, you can go back to the 1990s, for example, the national team, where 12 of the 15 members elected in this honorable house were all former civil servants. And we had a tendency of electing former civil servants before, people who understood how government operated. I think at one point, I think there's about, many of us inside here, at one point or so used to also work in government to have an idea. So you kind of come with a working knowledge, but when you're a minister and you're focusing on policies and everything else, it is one of the things that it needs to be a better job on. And I won't get into the specifics, and I can speak to you offline because at the end of the day, I don't like to say, but there's one particular example that really brought that for me, and I'll speak to you offline about it so you can understand the point that I'm making with it. Because if I give the example, then it will identify the individuals, and I don't believe that I should be using this pulpit or this forum to make it easy to identify anyone in that regard. But nonetheless, it's one of the things that we need to work on. I'm also glad to see, Madam Premier, that you have Cineco. The whole idea of the Cineco's expansion, if you go back to the current SPS that is in effect, of the 10 broad outcomes that is listed in it, the expansion of Cineco is in 3 of them. And one of the purposes of insurance is to spread risk. And what we don't have, and we've seen it now more than anything, is that from 16 to 65, for 9 years, you can work in the private sector and have private sector insurance. But the minute you go to retire, and the time in your life where you actually need insurance the most, that's when you have to turn to Cineco. And while the government made it mandatory for people to have health insurance, it didn't make it mandatory for people to sell health insurance. That's the reason we had to create Cineco. But now it is reaching a point, and where it has now become a burden to the taxpayers of this country. And colleagues, to put that in context, 20 years ago, when Cineco was created, they created something called a segregated insurance fund. At that time, the total cost for indigent was roughly $6 million a year. And we used to collect $3 million from that fund. So government would collect $3 million from the segregated insurance fund, which is that fee that most people would pay on their health insurance plans, and that was meant to cover half the indigent costs. So 20 years ago, it was $6 million. $3 million was half of it. Today, we collect around $5 million from that fund, but we're spending roughly $75 million. I mean, that in itself, I think, says that some real structural reforms is needed at this point. So while that was the idea back then, and it looked like it made sense back then based on information and events of back then, I think it's something that we need to relook at now, 20 years later, to see if this is the current approach. But it can't be a situation right now where what we're spending on healthcare, and this is not even civil servants healthcare, this is people out there that have struggled with healthcare. What we're spending on it is going to be a challenge. And the one other thing, Madam Premier, is the Cayman Development Bank. One institution more than anything that every country needs in order to move forward is credit and capital. We have not done enough, and banks are not designed for what it is that we need. We need more people, we need to encourage and incentivize more entities, more organizations to provide capital and to provide credit. You do not need a license from SEMA to lend money. You only need a license from SEMA if you collected money from the public. And if you look in the United Kingdom right now, for example, one of their cheapest mortgage rates is 4.29%. And Madam Speaker, just to put that in context, sorry, Mr. Speaker, just to put that in context. If you have a $500,000 loan at 4.29%, over 25 years, your monthly payment is $2,700 a month. Just even at prime, that same mortgage is $4,000 a month, $1,300 more a month per year. Per month. Over a year, that's $15,600. And over 25 years, you're talking about $400,000 in difference. These are the kind of stuff that affecting people's pension when they go to retire. And that's just on mortgage. If I do that to light, I do that to groceries, and you do that to insurance, by the time a Cayman goes to retire, compared to somebody in North America and Europe, they can be $600,000, $800,000 less when they go to retire. These are the kind of things that affect people in terms of their quality of life, and as we're looking to close the dignity gap. So from that standpoint, those would be the main thing. As I said, Madam Premier, the other technical stuff, whatever questions I have and other issues, I will send you a letter with that separately after Finance Committee, and if needs be, I'll be more than happy to meet with your team to hash out those issues. Last year, I just want to touch on, Mr. Speaker, with your permission, is that I really want to give the Honourable Leader of the Opposition credit for his presentation. he has he had raised some very significant points that so much so he didn't want to send me to update some of my calculations and everything else. But one of the things that he touched on that really jumped out for me was actually productivity. And I mean, and I basically went and did the work and everything else and that, and I shared it with him also during the break. But the reason I want to touch on productivity is that you measure productivity by taking the GDP of the country divided by the average hours, the total hours worked in the country. And the reason why I'm raising that as productivity, again, being a service-based economy, with 95% of our people making money from service, too many people are spending too much time in traffic. And if you factor in the 1-2 hours a day, and you carry that over the years and put it on 40-something thousand working people, it impacts our productivity in terms of service. So there's a possibility for us to actually increase productivity and then in the process of even get more government revenues from being able to provide more services to people and everything else. So those are pretty much the issue, but I just wanted to congratulate him for the work that he did. I'm a very technical person, and I can see where a lot of work went into preparing what it is that he did. And I will ask the members opposite to, if he has a copy of his speech, take a look at it, because he did raise some valid points, as with other members on this side too. But I just wanted to single that out to you, Mr. Leader, in terms of your presentation. I was actually quite moved, and they say that leadership in the 21st century has got to be inspirational and motivational, and your presentation met both of those criteria. So I wanted to thank you. And also I want to thank the honorable member from Cayman Brac West and Little Cayman for his delivery this morning. He did touch on some valuable stuff in terms of what it is that we also need to look at. I think the member for Georgetown South, passion when it comes down to education has always been there, and she's built a reputation for that. And David, for the member for Georgetown West, I'm going to tell you straight up, guys, if I'm ever going to battle in this house, the one person that I would want beside me more than anything would be the member for Georgetown West, because I'll tell you one thing, loyal and fiercely protective of Cayman. He has always been that, and even before politics. So you can't take that from them. And of course, the deputy leader of opposition, and he has continued in terms of the work that he has continued to do. But which one? Yeah, you tell me you're a lover, you're not a fighter. That's the last thing you told me. But to my constituents of Boddington West, Mr. Speaker, outside of my family achievements in terms of marriage and kids and everything else, the honor to represent the hardworking, aspirational people of Boddington West, there is no greater honor than that. And I can tell you, I just love interacting with them. And I'm really hoping that we can get Finance Committee done by this Friday, because I need to go out and visit every single house. Like, it's my time of year where I go to every house. Although there's about 1 or 2 houses I'm definitely not setting foot in. I don't need to get into that. Don't worry about that. They're not going to see me at their yard. But it's... No, you want yours? No, I bring yours for you this week. I already got somewhere. I bring them for members this week. But it's just one of the things I actually look forward to, is in terms of seeing the people, meet the people. Colleagues, it's a bit departure. I didn't get a chance this morning to stop Spot Docks on the way in, because it was raining. But I can tell you, every time I do come in this chamber, it's an awesome feeling. I mean, to sit in this chamber is an awesome feeling, but it's also comes with that awesome responsibility. You know, we do what we do, whether we're friends, but each one of us have a job to do. And we would not be doing our jobs if we didn't help, and in some cases, make suggestions where we think some things need to be done. But as the Honorable Deputy Premier said, the past is the past, and as Mr. Speaker, you always said there's no future in the past. It's about us working together, because at the end of the day, when we were all running, we knew every problem this country had. And we had a solution for every problem that was out there. We campaigned on it. Of course, when we get there, we realize what social planners call a wicked problem. But what I can say, without a doubt, that the things that are wrong with Cayman can still be fixed with the things that are right with Cayman. And if there's one people that we can depend on, go back to those 6 words, the people of the Cayman Islands. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member, Watertown West. Madam Premier, may I call on you to Honourable Member for West Bay North. How long do you anticipate being? We'll do that tomorrow morning. Rasta grow weary. Madam Premier, may I invite you to move the adjournment till 10 o'clock tomorrow morning?
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the adjournment of this Honourable House until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.
The question is that this House do now adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. The House is accordingly adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.